The gavel echoed through the mahogany courtroom, but it couldn't drown out the mistress's arrogant giggle. She sat beside the cheating husband, convinced they had won it all, leaving the heavy-set wife with nothing. They had no idea the woman they mocked was about to destroy their entire world. Courtroom 302 of the downtown Chicago family court was suffocatingly quiet, save for the rhythmic, arrogant tapping of Chloe Jenkins' stiletto heel against the hardwood floor. She sat in the gallery, directly behind the petitioner's table, leaning forward so her intoxicating, expensive perfume would waft over to the man she had stolen. Arthur Pendleton sat at that table, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, looking every inch the self-made millionaire he desperately believed himself to be. Across the aisle sat Beatrice. Beatrice Pendleton did not look like the wife of a logistics magnate. She sat heavily in her wooden chair, her broad shoulders slumped underneath an ill-fitting faded navy tweed blazer. She was a large woman, a fact that Arthur had spent the last 5 years weaponizing against her. The stress of his constant belittling, combined with a severe, untreated thyroid condition, had added pounds that Arthur viewed as a personal insult to his status. As Beatrice sat there, her hands clasped tightly over a worn, scuffed leather briefcase resting on her lap, she looked defeated. She looked like a woman who had been discarded, traded in for a newer, sleeker model, which was exactly what Chloe was. At 26, Chloe was a razor-sharp executive assistant with a penchant for crimson designer dresses and a ruthless ambition that matched Arthur's. She let out a soft, breathy giggle as Arthur's high-powered attorney, Gregory Finch, cracked a quiet joke at the plaintiff's table. "Silence in the gallery, please," Honorable Judge Samuel Harrison grumbled, adjusting his glasses as he peered over the mountain of divorce filings. He was an old-school judge near retirement, and he had seen 1,000 bitter divorces. But the blatant disrespect radiating from Arthur's side of the room was testing his patience. "Your Honor," Finch began, standing up and buttoning his jacket with a theatrical flair. "We are here today to finalize the dissolution of marriage between my client, Mr. Bullinge, Arthur Pendleton, and the respondent, Mrs. Beatrice Pendleton. As outlined in the filings, we are proposing a clean break. Mr. Pendleton has generously offered a lump sum alimony payment of $50,000, along with the title to the 2015 Volvo station wagon." A hushed murmur rippled through the few clerks in the room. $50,000. Arthur's company, Vanguard Logistics, had just reported an annual revenue of over $30 million. It was an insulting, devastatingly low offer. Beside Beatrice, her attorney, Thomas Linus, let out a heavy sigh. Linus was a public defender type who had transitioned to private family law, a man who perpetually looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He shuffled his papers, looking nervously at Beatrice. "Your Honor, we object to this proposal in its entirety," Linus said, his voice lacking the booming confidence of his opponent. "My client and Mr. Pendleton have been married for 12 years. Vanguard Logistics was founded during the course of this marriage. It is marital property. Mrs. Pendleton is entitled to half of the marital estate." Arthur let out a sharp, derisive snort. He leaned back in his chair, whispering loudly to Finch. "Half? She hasn't gotten off the couch in 5 years. The only thing she built was a tab at the local bakery." "Not who?" Chloe, sitting right behind him, covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. She leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for Beatrice to hear across the aisle. $50,000 is too much. She'll just eat it anyway." Beatrice didn't move. Her expression remained entirely passive, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wooden table in front of her. She didn't cry, she didn't lash out. Her thumb merely traced the brass latch of her battered briefcase. "Counselor Finch," Judge Harrison warned, his gavel hovering over the sounding block, "control your client and his guest, or I will have the gallery cleared." "Apologies, Your Honor," Finch said smoothly, though his smirk betrayed his lack of sincerity. "My client is simply frustrated. He has poured his blood, sweat, and tears into Vanguard Logistics. He started it from a single leased warehouse. Mrs. Pendleton, by her own admission in deposition, has not worked a traditional job since the second year of their marriage. She had no hand in the day-to-day operations, the strategic planning, or the financing. To award her 50% of the company she wouldn't even know how to locate on a map is a gross miscarriage of equity. Finch paced the floor, commanding the room. He painted a masterful, devastating portrait of Beatrice. He described a woman who had let herself go, who had abandoned the marriage emotionally and physically, leaving Arthur to shoulder the burden of providing for them both. He presented Arthur as a martyr, a hard-working entrepreneur who had finally found happiness and was now being extorted by a lazy, resentful ex-wife. The seed money for Vanguard, Finch continued, projecting his voice, came from an anonymous angel investor group, Apex Financial Ventures. Not a dime came from Mrs. Pendleton. She brought no assets into this marriage, and she contributed none during it. The $50,000 is a gift. It is charity. Beatrice finally looked up. Her eyes met Arthur's. He gave her a smug, condescending wink, utterly convinced he had outmaneuvered the woman he had spent a decade underestimating. The afternoon session began with Arthur taking the witness stand to testify to his financial independence. As he swore on the Bible, Chloe watched him with heart-eyed adoration, twirling a diamond tennis bracelet around her wrist, a piece of jewelry. Beatrice knew for a fact cost exactly $14,000, paid for from an account Arthur claimed was frozen for tax purposes. "Mr. Pendleton," Finch prompted gently, leaning against the wooden podium, "could you walk the court through the early days of Vanguard Logistics? How did you manage to build such a successful enterprise?" Arthur adjusted the microphone, looking exceptionally pleased with himself. "It was relentless, grueling work, Your Honor. Long nights, 80-hour work weeks. I had a vision to revolutionize regional freight distribution, but I had zero support at home. I would come home exhausted, looking for a partner to share my burdens with, and I would find—" He paused, casting a mournful, disappointed look toward Beatrice. "I would find my wife asleep in front of the television." Again. Beatrice's lawyer, Linus, bristled. "Objection. Relevance. Character assassination. Sustained. Keep it to the finances, Mr. Finch," the judge ordered, though the damage was done. The narrative was set. "Right. Finances," Arthur nodded, playing the compliant citizen. "Because I had no financial support from my spouse, I had to hustle. I pitched to dozens of investment firms. Finally, 9 years ago, a blind trust managed by Apex Financial Ventures saw my potential. They injected $2 million in seed capital. That was the turning point. I did that. I secured that funding through my own merit and business acumen. Beatrice didn't even know what an equity stake was. She thought Apex was a brand of vacuum cleaner." A few chuckles erupted from the gallery. Chloe practically beamed, mouthing the words, "Oh, you're brilliant," to Arthur. "And since then?" Finch asked. "Since then, I've grown the company tenfold. I am the CEO, the founder, and the sole driving force. I am willing to be fair, Your Honor, but giving her half of my life's work would bankrupt the company and destroy the livelihoods of my 300 employees." Arthur looked earnestly at the judge. "I just want to move on with my life, with someone who actually supports me." He cast a loving glance at Chloe. Finch nodded solemnly. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles at Thomas Linus. "Mr. Linus." "Cross-examination?" Linus stood up slowly. He looked nervously at Beatrice, who simply gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. She patted the worn leather briefcase on her lap, slowly undoing the brass latches with a dull click. She reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of documents bound in a black folder, sliding them quietly across the table to her attorney. "Yes, Your Honor." "Thank you," Linus said, clearing his throat. The hesitant, bumbling demeanor he had displayed all morning seemed to evaporate as his hand touched the black folder. He walked toward the stand, holding a single piece of paper. Mr. Pendleton, Linus began, his voice surprisingly steady, you just testified under oath that you built Vanguard Logistics entirely through your own merit, specifically citing a $2 million seed investment from a blind trust known as Apex Financial Ventures. Is that correct? That is correct, Arthur said, crossing his arms. He wasn't intimidated by Linus. He viewed the rumpled lawyer as an extension of Beatrice, weak, incompetent, and easily bulldozed. And you testified that Mrs. Pendleton had no knowledge of this investment, nor any hand in securing it. She didn't even know the name of the firm until she read the divorce discovery documents, Arthur scoffed. She has absolutely no connection to Apex. Linus adjusted his glasses. Are you aware, Mr. Pendleton, of how a blind trust operates? Of course I am, Arthur snapped. The beneficiary in this case, me and my company, does not know the identity of the trustees or the exact individuals funding the trust. It prevents conflicts of interest. The investors liked my business model, but they wanted to remain anonymous. Anonymous. Linus repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the stifling air of the courtroom. Yes, anonymity can be very useful, especially when you are trying to help someone who refuses to accept charity. Or perhaps when you are trying to protect a massive family fortune from a man with a documented history of reckless gambling debts. Finch shot up from his chair. Objection, Your Honor, what is this? There is no evidence of gambling debts. I have the casino markers right here, Your Honor, Linus countered smoothly, producing a second sheet of paper from the black folder, dating back to the first year of the marriage. Nearly $200,000 in debt incurred by Mr. Pendleton paid off in a single lump sum by my client. Arthur's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his face draining of color before he quickly composed himself. That was a long time ago, a brief lapse in judgment. It has nothing to do with Vanguard. Perhaps not directly, Linus conceded, stepping closer to the witness stand. But it speaks to why an investor might want to hide their identity from you. Tell me, Mr. Lice Pendleton, during your rigorous background checks on Apex Financial Ventures, did you ever look into the parent company that manages their private wealth? Arthur shifted uncomfortably in the wooden chair. Chloe stopped smiling, leaning forward as a sudden unfamiliar tension crept into the room. They are managed by a private wealth firm out of New York. Carmichael Holdings, Arthur stated, sounding defensive. They manage billions. It's standard corporate structuring. Carmichael Holdings, Linus echoed. He turned his back on Arthur and looked directly at Beatrice. She sat completely still, the faded tweed blazer suddenly looking less like a symbol of defeat and more like deliberate camouflage. Mr. Pendleton, Linus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Do you happen to recall your wife's maiden name? Arthur blinked. The question was so sudden, so seemingly irrelevant, that it caught him completely off guard. Her maiden name? Carmichael. Beatrice Carmichael. What does that have to do with anything? The silence that followed was absolute. The slow realization had not yet hit Arthur, but Judge Harrison suddenly sat up straighter, his eyes darting between the paperwork on his desk and the heavy-set woman sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table. Linus pulled a sealed, notarized document from the black folder and approached the judge's bench. Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit F, a certified corporate charter and ownership declaration for Carmichael Holdings. Lots. Finch practically lunged toward the bench, snatching his copy of the document. As his eyes scanned the pages, the aggressive, theatrical lawyer seemed to shrink. He looked at Arthur, then at Beatrice, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. What is it, Finch? Arthur hissed from the stand, a bead of cold sweat forming on his temple. What does it say? Linus didn't let Finch answer. He turned to face the cheating husband, a cold, merciless smile spreading across his face. Gregory Finch's face drained of all color, resembling a sheet of parchment as his eyes darted violently across the notarized document in his trembling hands. The aggressive theatrical attorney who had spent the entire morning strutting around the courtroom suddenly looked like a man who had stepped on a landmine and was just waiting for the click. "Your Honor, this is impossible," Finch stammered, his voice cracking entirely. "This is a forgery. Carmichael Holdings is a legacy conglomerate out of Manhattan. They own shipping lines, real estate, massive tech portfolios. They are worth billions. To suggest that she—" He pointed a shaking finger at Beatrice, unable to finish the sentence. "Careful, counselor," Judge Harrison warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You are bordering on contempt. Mr. Linus, please clarify what we are looking at." "Doggone marble. Not for." Thomas Linus adjusted his glasses, standing taller now, the rumpled public defender aesthetic suddenly appearing like a brilliant, tactical disguise. "Your Honor, Plaintiff's Exhibit F is the official corporate registry and articles of incorporation for Carmichael Holdings, updated and certified as of 3 months ago. The document clearly lists Beatrice Eleanor Carmichael, my client, as the primary stakeholder, holding 68% of the voting shares. She is the granddaughter of the late Theodore Carmichael, the firm's founder. Furthermore, my client currently serves as the anonymous acting CEO of the entire conglomerate." A pin drop could have been heard in courtroom 302. The bailiff stopped breathing. The court stenographer's hands froze over her machine. Arthur Pendleton stared at Linus, then slowly turned his head to look at the woman he had spent the last 5 years tormenting. Beatrice sat perfectly still. The heavy-set woman in the ill-fitting navy tweed blazer no longer looked defeated. As Arthur stared into her eyes, he didn't see the lazy, submissive housewife he had painted her out to be. He saw a predator looking at a very small, very stupid mouse. "No," Arthur whispered, a nervous, breathless laugh escaping his lips. "No, that's a lie. It's a trick. She buys off-brand cereal. For God's sake! She drives a rusty Volvo. She spends all day sitting on the couch in sweatpants typing on a laptop. She doesn't know the first thing about business. She was managing a multi-billion-dollar global portfolio, Mr. Pendleton," Linus corrected smoothly, pacing in front of the witness stand. "While you were playing CEO at your little logistics company, trying to figure out how to route trucks through the Midwest, my client was negotiating international trade mergers. The laptop she was typing on all day was connected to a secure, encrypted server routed to Wall Street. But the wait... The doctor's Arthur stuttered, his perfectly manicured image rapidly disintegrating. "She let herself go. She gave up." Linus' expression hardened into pure disgust. "My client suffers from Hashimoto's disease, a severe autoimmune thyroid condition compounded by chronic stress. And what was the source of that stress, Mr. Pendleton? Was it managing a global empire? No, it was quietly cleaning up the catastrophic messes of her profoundly arrogant husband." Linus walked back to the plaintiff's table and pulled another stack of papers from the black folder. "Your Honor, let's talk about Vanguard Logistics. Mr. Pendleton claims he built it from nothing. The truth is, Vanguard Logistics was bleeding money its first 2 years. It was on the verge of bankruptcy. But Mr. Pendleton's ego couldn't handle failure. So rather than let her husband face the reality of his own incompetence, Mrs. Pendleton quietly instructed Apex Financial Ventures, a subsidiary of her own company, to inject $2 million into Vanguard. She felt sorry for you, Arthur," Linus said, turning his back to the judge and looking directly at the cheating husband. "She funded your company out of pity. She created a little sandbox for you to play in, hoping it would keep you busy. Hoping it would keep you away from the blackjack tables, and hoping it would finally make you happy." In the gallery, Chloe Jenkins sat frozen. The 26-year-old executive assistant who just moments ago had been giggling at Beatrice's expense suddenly looked nauseous. Her eyes darted from Arthur to Beatrice, the horrifying realization washing over her. She hadn't stolen a self-made millionaire. She had stolen a highly subsidized charity case. "I don't believe it," Arthur yelled, gripping the edges of the witness stand, his knuckles turning white. "I am Vanguard. I signed the deals. I made the connections. I own the company." "Do you?" Linus asked softly. He looked at Beatrice and gave her a slight nod. For the first time all day, Beatrice Pendleton stood up. She didn't rush. She moved with the deliberate, heavy grace of a woman who owned the room. She walked around the table, ignoring Finch, ignoring Chloe, and stood directly in front of her husband. "You never read the fine print, Arthur," Beatrice spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it resonated with a chilling, authoritative calm that echoed off the mahogany walls. "You were always so obsessed with the big picture, the glossy brochures, the fancy title on your door. You never actually read the covenanters of the Apex investment." Arthur swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his jawline. "What covenanters?" Beatrice turned to Judge Harrison. "Your Honor, if I may." "Proceed, Mrs. Pendleton," Judge Harrison said, leaning far over his bench, utterly captivated by the dismantling of the arrogant man before him. "When Apex Financial injected that $2 million, Beatrice explained, her tone shifting to that of a seasoned corporate lecturer, it was not a standard equity purchase. It was structured as convertible mezzanine debt, secured by the intellectual property, physical assets, and voting shares of Vanguard Logistics." Finch, who had been staring blankly at the floor, suddenly snapped his head up. As a lawyer, he knew exactly what those words meant. "Oh my God," he whispered. "I included a very specific fiduciary morality clause in that debt agreement," Beatrice continued, her eyes locking back onto Arthur. "A clause that states if the CEO of Vanguard Logistics is found to be commingling personal expenses with operating capital, embezzling funds, or engaging in gross financial misconduct, the debt is immediately called in. If the debt cannot be paid within 24 hours, Apex Financial reserves the right to execute a hostile takeover, seizing 80% of the company's voting shares." Arthur laughed, a high, panicked sound. "I never embezzled anything. I run a clean ship. My books are audited. Your books are cooked, Arthur," Beatrice said coldly. "And you aren't very smart about it." Linus stepped forward, handing a thick ledger to the bailiff to pass to the judge. "Your Honor, Plaintiff's Exhibit G, Forensic Accounting of Vanguard's marketing and client outreach accounts over the last 18 months. You will find a $14,000 charge to Cartier for a diamond tennis bracelet." Chloe instinctively grabbed her wrist, trying to pull the sleeve of her crimson dress down over the sparkling jewelry. "You will also find," Linus continued, $32,000 in charges for first-class flights and luxury cabanas in Cabo San Lucas, categorized as a logistics networking conference. A conference, I might add, that did not exist. There are hotel receipts, spa bills, and designer handbag purchases, all funneled through corporate accounts to fund Mr. Poddy Pendleton's affair with his assistant, Miss Jenkins. "Objection!" Finch cried out, though his heart clearly wasn't in it. It was the desperate reflex of a dying man. "Overruled," Judge Harrison barked, his face turning red with anger as he flipped through the ledger. "This is blatant corporate fraud, Mr. Pendleton. You used your investors' money to fund your mistress. And as the primary stakeholder of that investment firm," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "I am officially calling in the debt." Arthur's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. "You can't do that. It's $2 million. Plus interest. We don't have that in liquid capital. It will bankrupt the company." "No, Arthur. It will bankrupt you," Beatrice corrected. "Vanguard will be fine. I already have a new restructuring team ready to step in on Monday. They will trim the fat, starting with the CEO." The reality of the situation finally crashed down on Arthur Pendleton. He wasn't just losing the divorce. He was losing his company. He was losing his income. He was going to face massive federal fraud charges. The pristine, wealthy life he had built on the back of his wife's silent generosity was evaporating into thin air. He looked desperately at the gallery. Chloe, tell them. Tell them those were bonuses. Tell them it was legitimate compensation. Chloe Jenkins stood up. The breathy, arrogant giggle was gone. She looked at Arthur as if he were a diseased animal. She looked at the judge, then at Beatrice, her survival instincts kicking in. "I have no idea what he's talking about," Chloe said, her voice shaking but loud enough for the court stenographer to hear. "I was just an employee doing what I was told. If he was stealing money, I had no part in it. I quit." Without another word, Chloe grabbed her designer purse paid for by Beatrice's money, turned on her stiletto heels, and practically sprinted out of the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors slamming shut behind her. Arthur reached out a hand toward the empty aisle, completely broken. "Chloe, wait." "She's gone, Arthur," Beatrice said, showing no sympathy. "She was never with you for you. She was with you for the money. My money." Beatrice walked back to her chair and sat down, folding her hands neatly over her briefcase. "Your Honor, we are withdrawing our request for half of Vanguard Logistics." "I don't want half. I am taking the whole thing through corporate asset seizure. As for the marital assets, I'm perfectly willing to accept Mr. Best Pendleton's initial offer." Linus grinned, barely suppressing a laugh. "Yes, Your Honor, we accept the $50,000. And we will happily take the 2015 Volvo." Arthur dropped his head into his hands, openly weeping on the witness stand. The man who had walked into the room an arrogant king was leaving it a destitute, humiliated fraud. Judge Harrison took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at Arthur with profound contempt, then turned a respectful gaze toward Beatrice. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen a lot of foolish men," Judge Harrison stated, his voice echoing through the quiet room. "But you, Mr. Pendleton, are in a class of your own. You bit the hand that literally fed you, clothed you, and built your entire reality." The judge picked up his gavel. "The divorce is granted. The marital assets will be divided as agreed upon in this bizarre twist of fate. Mr. Pendleton, you are ordered to vacate the marital home by midnight tonight. Furthermore, I am forwarding Plaintiff's Exhibit G to the District Attorney's Office for review of corporate embezzlement and fraud." Judge Harrison looked right into Arthur's tear-streaked face. "Good luck paying for a defense attorney on a $50,000 budget. Court is adjourned." The gavel slammed down with a resounding, thunderous crack. Beatrice Pendleton didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood up, buttoned her faded tweed blazer, picked up her scuffed briefcase, and walked out of the courtroom to go back to running the world, leaving the cheating husband to drown in the ruins of his own making. Karma has a funny way of wearing a disguise, and today it wore a faded tweed blazer. Arthur traded a billionaire queen for a penniless pawn, losing his entire company and his pride in one brutal afternoon. If you loved this story of ultimate revenge, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping real-life courtroom dramas. Don't miss out.